I'm Travis Bader, and this is the Silvercore Podcast. Silvercore has been providing its members with the skills and knowledge necessary to be confident and proficient in the outdoors for over 20 years, and we make it easier for people to deepen their connection to the natural world. If you enjoy the positive and educational content we provide, please let others know by sharing, commenting, and following so that you can join in on everything that Silvercore stands for. If you'd like to learn more about becoming a member of the Silvercore Club and community, visit our website at silvercore.ca. Do you want to sleep better, relax, achieve more, be happier, take control? That's the goal of today's guest, who left the prestigious lifestyle of working at some of the UK's largest media production companies to forge a new path, along with co-founder Bear Grylls, to develop Mettle, the first mobile app designed specifically for men's mental fitness. Welcome to the Silvercore Podcast, Neil Smith.
Thank you, Travis. What a great intro. You know, you did say, if you don't like it, you can just say start again. But no, let's go with that.
We'll go with that one? Excellent. I always, I find that's the hardest part for me is doing that intro, because if I don't do that right, then I set the tone wrong. And there's a part of me that feels I've done this for like 120 podcasts. Maybe it's time I should just start talking and see where it goes. But
yeah, you did look very serious. You looked very serious when you were delivering it.
Well, you gotta make it look right. When we were talking before, you were saying that some of the happiest times in your life are times when you've been working with the co-founder of Mettle, Bear Grylls, and you were telling a few kind of fun stories that surrounded that. Are those things that you'd want to share with the audience here?
Of course. What sort of fun stories? I can't remember which ones they were. I mean,
Well, you didn't delve too deep into them, so I was hoping to get them from you here.
Yeah, fine. I mean, well, look, Mettle, M-E-T-T-L-E, that is. So it's not metal kind of material. It's metal as in, M-E-T-T-L-E is the spelling, and it's a person's ability to overcome or cope with difficulties, spirit and resilience. And I guess that, before I got into the mental fitness app game, as you say, I was a big TV producer in the UK. I ran a couple of big production companies. One of the companies I ran, I met Bear for the first time. We started working together, and we spent many, many years having great shows. And Mettle actually kind of sums up what his shows are about. It's about a person's ability to cope and overcome difficulties. Spirit and resilience. Mm-hmm. So actually, the name of our company now really kind of encapsulates what we were doing. So I mean, Bear is brilliant fun to work with. Because, by the time I started working with Bear, I was probably a little bit too senior to go on every shoot, But I did anyway, because they were the shoots that I wanted to be on. And I'd always kind of say to the team, look, it's an expensive show. There's a lot that can go wrong, true. It's dangerous, also true. I really need to be on this shoot. And we just had a brilliant time filming together all over the world, Bear is a kind of consummate performer, but he's also somebody who really kind of lives this stuff. Yeah. So he loves adventure. He can't really live without it. He's so, in his downtime, you'll find him jumping out of planes, often way more dangerously actually than we're allowed to do on TV. That much lower kind of distances from the ground, lower heights. So it was just brilliant fun to travel with him and his crew. He always kind of credits the crew as being the real heroes of the journey, because they're the ones who kind of have to do exactly the same as him, but with a camera or a sound kit on their backs. And I 100% agree with that. It does create a great atmosphere, and you've got a great crew kind of flying around the world, just getting up to hijinks, jumping out of airplanes into volcanic lakes, whatever it might be, sleeping in the jungle. Eating crazy stuff, feeding, A-list celebrities ants for breakfast or wherever it could be, So working with Bear was one of the highlights of my career for sure, in TV. And it's great fun. I mean, you're an outdoors man yourself, aren't you? So, I'm based in London. Our ability to kind of get out in the wild is more limited. And so doing those shows, it's great. However, I was at a Google presentation that we did recently, that Bear did, and somebody asked him, "Oh, what if you live in the city? How do you connect with nature?" He said, "Turn on the cold tap, get in the cold shower, turn on the cold tap."
Yeah.
There's nature for you right there. Having a cold shower. That's kind of one of the ways that you can kind of look after your mental fitness. That's a great way to reconnect with nature. I don't know how often are you out in the wild, Trevor?
I always say not often enough, not as often as I'd like, because personally, I'd like to be out there all the time. And Silvercore is Silvercore Outdoors, the company, not the Silvercore Podcast, is designed specifically to help strengthen people's connections with their natural environment. And I do that because it brings me a lot of comfort and joy being outside. There is a whole mental fitness aspect to that.
Yeah. Sure.
Some people, they don't even want to be able to, they're afraid to go outside. They don't know what to do. They don't want to go in the ocean because they're afraid of sharks. Well, we don't have sharks over here. They don't want to go in the woods because of bears. Well, we have bears, but they're not a concern if we look at this statistically, right? But if we can do a little bit just to break down those barriers and to deepen that connection with people's natural environment, then, that speaks to me and my soul. I like to create things. I like to be outside. How can I marry the two of those together? And this is where I'm at so far in my endeavor and in my journey going through is with Silvercore Outdoors and the podcast. And hopefully people listening to this, it'll inspire them to say, man, like, what is this Mettle app that I could check out? Or like one of our past guests recently, Alistair Humphreys, he's one of your countrymen, and he's...
Absolutely.
Yeah, and he was talking about micro adventures and how, like, if you're in a built-up area, how can you get out and actually have an adventure and maybe get portions of what you get on some major epic adventure as well. So that's what I'm looking to do with the podcast. If there's some positivity I can share and bring value to the audience and the guest, I've done my job.
Yeah, absolutely.
I met Bear a few years ago at SHOT Show. SHOT Show is a shooting, hunting, outdoor trade show in Vegas, and
oh wow,
I've watched his shows for years, and the one thing that always struck me is that underlying positivity. Like he'll have his detractors. He'll have people come out and say, "Oh, he stayed in a hotel sometime," or and who knows, maybe that was part of you guys and your production team putting him up, or.
It wasn't. I can just say actually, categorically that he never stayed in a hotel when we filmed him, as if he'd stayed overnight on any of our productions. Well, so
and
if he was sleeping out, he was sleeping out.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, there were, and I'd watched these people, and I won't get into the specifics because people can Google and then get there themselves. But what really impressed me was the response, and the response always was, so and so probably is a better bushcraft person than myself, or I'm just trying to do A, B, C and bring some positivity, or you know what, this person over here, they've got a great thing, I'd give it to them. And he's always quick to give away that credit to somebody else, and that ego 100%. Seems to be low. I mean, everyone's going to have an ego, but the management of that ego and the underlying goal of what it seems like he's trying to do, which is to spread positivity and to bring people up, shines through. So
it's to he wants people to find their own adventures. You're right. He, as I said earlier, he always says, "Oh, it's not me who's doing. I'm not the real hero. Look at the crew. Mm-hmm. That guy's got to do the same as me, but with a 15 kilo camera on his shoulder, and still hang off everything. And it's kind of like, absolutely. He's a kind of very humble character. But, it's all about inspiring people. Bear's mantra is never give up, which I love. It's kind of like, okay, well, whatever you're going through, keep going. Mm-hmm. So he is more about positivity, I'd say, than even the wild these days. Because, it's just sort of, that's kind of, central to kind of what he's trying to get across, I think, that positive attitude.
I think that's how you affect change, right? I mean, you can go out there and you can personify a positive lifestyle. You can be in the outdoors lifestyle and you can do these crazy things, which some of it's going to be amped up a little bit for camera. Like, I don't know who's going to be out there drinking bear dung,
Yeah.
right? But unless you absolutely
Of course, yeah.
need to. But
But then at least you've learned how to do it.
there you go. And it gets people talking, right? And there's a virality to that.
So, you know, in terms of stories, you know, that was one. I remember there's a big channel here called ITV. Yeah, so that's like, you know, our big, you know, one of our big free-to-air channels, one of the top, well, first to second biggest channel, you know. And I remember being told that I'd brought the channel to a new low by the head of entertainment there, which I was very pleased about. It's actually the second time I managed that I got that honour twice. But this was because we had like a big celebrity show. It's called Mission Survive, and Bear took celebrities out into the wild, and you know they got eliminated. Yeah, so it was a kind of classic reality style format. It was really, really fun. And on one of these shows, you know, we'd already done the urine drinking, you know, as a kind of, which was brilliant, you know, of course, you know. But, you know, we needed to step it up a level. So, you know, we got them to give themselves enemas.
I remember that.
Which, you know, on national, this is quite a conservative national channel, you know, which was, you know, really, really something that we managed to get away with that. Being told, oh, you've brought the channel to a new low, but in a congratulatory way by the head of entertainment.
Oh, that's funny.
But, you know, I said, yeah, but actually, if you were stuck in the sea, you know, and like you didn't have any fresh water, then, you know, like an enema is a great way to kind of purify some of that salt water and keep you alive. So it could keep you alive, that tip. So what we're providing is a really useful kind of, you know, educational tool for the viewers.
Well, I tell you this much, the idea of hydrating through an enema had never crossed my mind prior to that. But, you know, if I find myself in that situation, maybe it'll be one of those things that my mind can recall.
Yeah. I mean, it is painful because, you know, salt water on those very fine mucous membranes is something that is kind of, you know, not to be taken lightly. I don't know whether you've ever been in a flotation tank.
No, I haven't done that. The idea of a flotation tank to me sounds fantastic, but the idea that I don't know how many other people have been floating in this bath and doing Lord knows what, that doesn't appeal to me.
Yeah, but you know, one of the things you're often told to do is kind of, you know, grease around the anus before getting in to try and protect it from the salt water.
I've never heard. I didn't know that. Okay, good to know.
I don't know how we've got onto this subject so quickly, Travis.
Well, I've got ADHD, so I tend to flow pretty easily.
Me too.
Do you really?
Me too. I'm a big champion of neurodiverse leaders, and you know, not just, you know, I work with neurodiverse leaders, but you know, neurodiversity in the workplace in general, you know, and in schools. I think this is another subject, but it's one that's really close to my heart. You know that my wife just started teaching a university. On it, there was a kind of question saying, "Do you suffer from a disability?" And it said, "What?" And it said, "Tick the disability, ADHD, kind of dyspraxia." And she's like, "Those aren't disabilities." You see, I mean, I would argue that ADHD is a superpower
in ways, yes.
Because, you know, for me, obviously, at school, it was chaos because I was chaos. Yeah. But once I kind of came to running a big company and I had 15 things to do at once, no problem. Yeah, give me one thing to do, I'll struggle.
I can relate to that. What was school like for you growing up?
It was difficult.
Yeah.
But fun. I mean, it was fun for me, not so much fun for my teachers, I imagine. You know, because I pathologically could not behave.
Yeah.
You know, I wasn't a bad kid, but because I had such severe ADHD, I got moved up years, down years, like excluded from classes, subjects, whole subject matters, you know. But you know, my crowning glory at school, my big achievement, in my own opinion, is we have these things called O levels, which are exams you take, your first big set of exams that you take around 16. And I was excluded from physics as a subject because I was too disruptive. And so they said, you've got to teach yourself the rest of the course, you know, so I did. And unfortunately for the school, I came top of the county.
Wow.
In physics. And the first day or the first week of the next year of school, you know, they had to present me with an award.
See, isn't that funny?
coming top in the county in physics, and of course the whole school knew that I hadn't been taught by them, and so it was kind of,
Isn't that funny? Like, if a teacher could recognize and provide somebody like yourself with those tools to be able to get from point A to point B in a way that would work for you, man, the teacher would be wearing all the accolades, but instead it's you.
Exactly.
It's on you.
Yeah.
I remember.
But that's ADHD in action.
Yeah.
You know.
I got. I did not fit in with school. Elementary school.
No.
I graduated not because of my grades. My teacher said she didn't want to see me back in grade 7 again. She figured high school would sort me out. Grades aren't good enough, but I'm passing you anyways. Get into grade 8. I remember. Well, I mean, just acting out and the common behavioral things you do. And I remember we called him Chuck Morris. Charles Morris was the teacher's name. And I somehow was able to get under his skin so badly by just my disruptive behavior that he ran at me. And he was, I think 6'4" by the time I was in grade 7. I'm 6'6", 250 now. Actually, when I met Bear, he's like, he looks at me, he's like, they should call you Bear. Anyways, he ran at me and grabbed my throat with both hands and is choking me out on the table behind me. And this is a local private school that I was going to. And I was like, I got it. I won't do anything. I won't fight back. I'm going to pass the class. That was all that was going through my head as he's doing this. Yeah.
Well, teachers used to be so violent.
Yeah.
I mean, our teachers were, they were terrible, hitting kids and with whatever they could find.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Nowadays, that's all, in the UK, that's illegal now. It sort of became illegal while I was at school, but they, that sort of stuff that you've just described was completely normal behavior at one point.
Yeah.
So
I don't know how normal it was, but it was at least accepted to the point that because it was an all boys school and
me too. Yeah, so it's just accepted. Mine was a public, a free school. You didn't need to pay to go there, but it was selective and it was just for boys. Because I was quite academic actually, so that's how I used to get through things because I was academically quite gifted, I guess. I could get into trouble, and they wanted to keep me in because my grades were pretty good. So I kept the average up.
Well, I ended up.
But they were like, if you bring other people down too much, then you're out.
Yeah, well, I kind of did both. It just depended on where. Like, I ended up graduating on the honor roll, but I remember I spent a couple years at each different high school because I kept getting moved around, not because we moved, but because of the ADHD. And the last high school I was at was rated worst in the province, and I hated it there, but I wanted to be on the beach or I wanted to be up the mountain snowboarding. And so I tell the teachers, can you tell me what's expected for the week? Can you tell me what's expected for the day? I'm going to go across the street to the university. I'll go in the library. I'll do my work. And I had the rest of the day to myself after about an hour to 2 hours of doing my own work. End up graduating with honors. Teachers are like, we don't have this behavioral problem in our school, and he's getting good grades. Awesome.
Yep.
So, as I look at your transition there, and maybe that makes a bit more sense if you're talking about the ADHD and, impulsivity would be one of the things that kind of goes with it. I'd say optimism as well. I find more of a glass full than a glass empty person, and I always know I can achieve what I'm going to do, whether the ends justify the means at the end of it. Like all that effort I put in, it could have been a lot easier if I did something else. But you left some pretty high-profile, well-paying gigs to go into the crazy entrepreneur.
Crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, what was I thinking?
Yeah.
If I knew now if I knew then what I know now, I'd never have done it. No, it's not true.
No.
It's not true. But I had a midlife crisis, I guess, or other people, I heard of a theory called second mountain theory.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is that?
So second mountain theory. So obviously we've created an app for men, because for reasons that, we should discuss why men need their own product to help with their mental health and fitness, because they're not catered for, and there's a mental health crisis, which would be good to kind of dig into a bit. But so but there's this thing called second mountain theory, which is men tend to empire build. They protect themselves. So in our DNA, we want to protect. Yeah. So ourselves, our family, provide. Yeah, that's in our DNA. Yeah. So we protect and we provide and we build our fortresses and our careers, if you like, which enable us to protect and provide. And you climb a mountain, you think, right, I'm climbing this career, so I'm a man, I'm outcome focused. I've got to get to the top of the mountain, yeah. So I run to the top of the mountain, I get to the top of the mountain, and then you get to the top of the mountain, and you realise, I'm at the top of the mountain now. What next? And you see another mountain over there, and so that's the mountain I've got to climb. It's like a mountain there, and basically it's kind of like, there I was kind of like, I got to the top of my profession. I have pretty severe ADHD. As you probably can appreciate, Travis, I got to the top of my profession more by luck than design.
Funny, the harder I work, the luckier I get.
Yeah. So it's kind of, but I just did what I liked, yeah. And that was making TV shows, coming up with ideas, going out, filming them, directing them, whatever, And then, I got pretty good at that, started selling a few of them, and, ended up running first a company that made a lot of shows with Bear and various other things, and then a bigger company which made some of the UK's biggest shows by far. And yeah, it paid really well, and I had everything done for me. I had a big staff and a big team. It was very comfortable, but I was really unhappy. I felt unfulfilled, and I thought, okay, well, I've got all these skills. This ability to communicate, to take important ideas and bring them to mass audiences. I need to do that for good. I need to do something good in the world. I need to have a purpose, beyond just making telly and earning money. And, that TV was good TV. It entertained people. And the adventure stuff we did was great. And I did some stuff, I did stuff around homelessness where I took another survival guy, Ed Stafford.
Right, the 60 days.
Yeah, that's right. And we did 60 Days on the Streets. Yep. Yeah, so Ed normally, he does a show called Naked and Marooned, that's where he started. Then that became Marooned on Discovery. Now he does First Man Out, I think it's called. And he's, very authentic survivalist. So I said to him, and I just made a show with him on Discovery. And I said, look, Ed, you are ex-military, adopted, male, and have suffered from mental health problems, which he's publicised. All risk factors for ending up on the streets. There's a shocking homeless crisis going on in London. Why don't we just do your show, your 60 days and 60 nights on a desert island with nothing but a camera? Well, let's do it rather than on a desert island. We'll do it on the streets of the UK cities over winter. We'll do it over Christmas, and you have to spend Christmas out there, and you'd live homeless. And he just totally went for it. Spent 60 days fully immersed, surviving on the streets as a homeless person, and had all incredible adventures. And that brought a massive audience to homelessness, because that was actually the channel's highest new rating series for 2 years, and remained so for another 3, I think, after we did it, and it was about homelessness, which you think, oh God, I don't want to be battered over the head with some worthy kind of subject. So I thought, okay, well, can I do that? Can I do what I do really well, which is taking important ideas that may be a bit off-putting to people, but are important, and I'm able to communicate them to big audiences and bring those audiences. Because I do that for something that's really important to me, which in my case is mental fitness.
What?
So that sort of led me to leaving, and I mean, I've gone on the true founder's odyssey of going from wealthy to skim, remortgaging the house.
Yes.
Like my life has changed completely, as a result of a passion project, a vision, but it's something that I felt the world needed and I wanted to put into it.
What did that unhappiness look like, and how long did it last for?
Yeah. Okay, so the unhappiness, that's a really interesting question. So the unhappiness lasted about 6 months, I suppose, before I acted on it, I think. About 6 months. And what it looked like, the thing that I remember is that, I know that I'm not motivated. I'd love to have some more money now, but I wasn't particularly motivated by money then. I found myself counting how much money I'd made every day, just to sort of give me the purpose for the day. And that's when I knew that this is just not right. Just thinking, how much money have I earned today? Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like, it's like, and the people I worked with were great. The programs we were working with were great, but I just needed to strike out. There was a bigger. I felt, I just called to do something else. Whatever you want to call it. That second mountain theory, whatever it is. I had to do something else.
I look at money as a motivator, and it's something that I've always lived by. I'm comfortable having nothing or next to nothing. That's how I grew up. And
me too.
Right? A lot of people like that. I have a little bit of something now because I've built something, but if I lost that all tomorrow, okay, I know I've got the ability and talents to be able to rebuild it, but if I make money my driving factor, I'm always going to be chasing the money. But if I make the project or the endeavor or whatever it is that I'm passionate about my driving factor, I find that money will be a natural byproduct of my hard work and my efforts. And sometimes the end doesn't justify the means from a financial basis, but from a soul nourishing aspect, I'm doing what I love, and the end absolutely justifies the means. And whenever I find myself, because maybe it's an ADHD thing, but I like to build something, I like to create something, but the maintenance of something over and over, come in, come out, is the routine of the monotony of that can be a difficult thing for me. So I keep looking at how I can keep growing. I think that in it itself, always looking how you can grow, what you can do next, can be tiring. Are you like that?
Yeah. So one of the things that I did at my last company was we work with kind of, I was on like a global leaders kind of program, and they get you to create a personal purpose. So my personal purpose, my dream, the thing that I wanted to do was inspire wonder, greatness, and joy. That was my kind of purpose. That's what I loved doing. So I loved inspiring, wonder in, the shows that we made, so people can lose themselves in it, and joy, and greatness. I'd say, in my team, I love to nurture a team, and, empower them to, grow. But my biggest kind of belief was that learning and growth are non-negotiable. So for me, learning and growth are non-negotiable. Without which I sort of die inside, I guess, a little bit, And so I think that was what was going on with me. I just felt that I wasn't learning and growing. So now, wow, I got what I wished for. As you say, as a startup entrepreneur, I'm all learning and growing. There's nothing else but learning and growing. So it's kind of like, be careful what you wish for. But yeah, I mean, what are we here for? Arguably, other than to learn and grow. It's kind of like, it seems to me like a real kind of guiding principle. And in fact, we've just been working on our values for our company, and grow or growth or growing. I'm quite settled on it, but growth is one of our principles, because we all feel that we have to grow as people, and we need our company to grow to survive as well.
There's an interesting dichotomy there as well, because for people who want to grow, who want to self-improve, it's sort of like that old one with Rockefeller, and a reporter asked, like, you've got so much money, like, how much is enough? And he says, just $1 more. Same thing for these people who want to grow. Oh, just a bit more, just a bit more. And there's an argument to be made for, how do we enjoy what we have now? How do we come back and say, I want to grow, but I'm going to take a break for a little bit and say, this is my enjoyment time.
Absolutely. Yeah, so growth shouldn't be, you're right, because growth, when it's happening all the time, is painful. Like nature teaches us that, doesn't it? Growing pains that kids have, which is when they're growing too fast. Like when you started up a new business.
Yes.
That's painful growth. It's enjoyable. I'm loving it. But there's not much balance at the moment. Do you see what I mean? And that balance is important. So you want to grow, and you want to learn, and you want to enjoy, don't you? That's the kind of, ideally you want to grow a bit, learn a bit, and then enjoy the things you've grown into and learn about.
Well,
I guess.
totally.
You know what I
And I
mean?
guess that's the tough part with people who are like looking at self-betterment. Well,
Yeah, that's right.
to what level? Like,
Yeah, that's interesting.
am I
Yeah.
comparing myself against other people, or am I comparing myself against what I was yesterday? And when am I better in these different areas?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's interesting, yeah, because when we were looking at this product, so our product basically is a really simple toolkit for men because we saw that men were not being catered for. That you know, in the UK and similar in the US, I'm not sure about Canada, suicide is the biggest killer of men under 50 now, which is a shocking statistic. So like 80% now of all suicides are male versus female. And then I've got all these tools like meditation, breath work, and self-hypnosis that I've been using for years. But I noticed that, you know, most of my mates weren't using them yet. So I talked to them about it and they kind of stare into their pints and want to know what time the football's on. And, you know, it's kind of like taboo subject. And that's my expertise, yeah, like with the homeless thing, yeah. So it's kind of like taking taboo subjects and blowing them up, making them accessible. So for me, it's about making mental fitness, if you like, or growth, or whatever you want to call it, you know, that betterment, accessible, yeah, to everyone. Because some of the things that I had observed was there's a lot of information out there, but not much transformation. Yeah, so there's a lot of information for men, you know. So like, you know, whatever podcasts, you know, the Rogans or the Hubermans, or you know, great podcasts, you know, loads of information. But my wife was like, I remember my wife saying to me, who listened to them, saying, "Oh yeah, I've just heard this podcast, and this guy's saying that the key to healthy living is 17 different colours of vegetables every day or whatever." I'm like, yeah, but last week you had the podcast and he said that it was intermittent fasting.
Right.
So like, there's so much information, yeah, and there's not much transformation, yeah. So what I wanted to do is make, because for a lot of people that information is going to, as it is for me, it's going to be confusing and difficult to follow, yeah, because there's so much of it out there, and it's an industry, like an industry.
Sure it is.
You know, it's the manosphere or whatever you want to call it is an industry that needs content to feed it. And as a journalist, I understand that, you know. So it's not so much about the truth; it's about what's engaging and what will sell, you know, what's going to get me bums on seats or ears on headphones or whatever we call it these days. You know, so it's kind of, you know, but how do we just give people some tools that they can just use at their own pace and can transform them, and they don't need to think too much about it, you know? And like simple breath work, being able to control your breath according to when you want to sleep, or you want some energy in the morning, or you want, you know, you want to de-stress.
Relax. Yeah.
Yeah, just relax, yeah. Those are really transformational tools that anybody can use. Yeah, they're really accessible. Yeah, so it's not about striving for kind of some unreachable goal of perfection. You know, I'm no way in that camp. You know, like, you know what I mean? I don't go to the gym. I try and keep fit, but I'm not kind of, you know, I'm not, you know, equally, I'm not very good at meditation, even though I've been doing it since I was like 11, 12 years old. Yeah, but I still get the benefits of it. And if we can just share those tools with people, then they can also benefit from them. So I think, you know, that's something, that thing about growth and comparing, you know, we don't all need to be David Goggins,
Right.
is what I think.
Yes.
I'm saying, you know, we just all need to be, we'd all benefit from being a bit better. Yeah, so having slightly better physical health or slightly better mental health or mental fitness, and you know, so it's just a progression that you go on, a journey that you go on at your own pace, I think, you know, rather than saying I've got to be here in 6 weeks.
Well,
you know?
It's interesting, like, you know, you're talking about that second mountain, and Alan Watts, he's, a lot of people have heard of him, philosopher. I mean, if you look at his life, he had a plethora of problems as well. I mean, but he had some good things that he could share with people from his studies and his learnings. But he has this neat one, I think, the after school SKOOL. They do the little scribble drawings and voiceovers of people, and I always find those fun because it's, engaging for an ADHD brain, but he's got Alan Watts
Yeah, yeah,
talking about,
yeah. No, I'm familiar with them.
yeah,
Yeah.
you got all of these promises. Oh, you pay attention, you do your homework, you'll graduate, you'll get top of the class, right? You go to high school, you get into a good university, you get in university, you get a good job, and you're fed all of these promises, and it's up there, keep going, right? There's that mountain, you get to the peak, and when you get to the peak, you sit there and you say, is that it? Right? I've been fed this story this entire time.
That's right.
Is that it? And he says, you get there and you realize that the whole thing was a musical event. You're supposed to be singing and dancing along the way and engaging in part of the process. So that made me think of that Alan Watts speech. But that second mountain thing, you've been vocal about the fact that I think it was in your 20s you suffered depression.
Yeah.
Was that for similar reasons? You weren't finding the purpose inspiring people, or what was that about?
You know what? I don't actually know. Might be, and there's a reason I don't know. It's because I never got it properly treated by a doctor, I suppose. So I never delved into that side of things, or by a talk therapist or whatever. I never took medication for it. So my experience with depression is it came along, like when I was in my early 20s, I guess. I think I was just finished university, and I was still living near the university. My doctor was the university, the university medical practice. And when you've got depression, like in a bad way, there's all the signs, So I'm depressed, So here I am. I don't know what's caused it, but because I was at the start of my life, then I was, or the start of my career, and I was able to progress my career alongside having depression for a long time, and I did really well. I started as a journalist and then went into television, and I was always successful, but I was kind of plagued with depression. And I went to see, so it took all the courage, like many or potentially most men, I didn't tell anybody about it apart from my girlfriend, And I think this is part of, the thing that we're trying to tackle is just this, that men, there's a big message around mental health for men that men don't talk, and they need to talk, And I agree, that's a really, really important thing for men to do, to talk about their mental health and how they're feeling, because some men will very sadly take their problems to the grave. So, sadly I had an example of it recently where a friend of mine, one of his very good friends, took his own life. And, around the time that he was doing it, like a few minutes before, he was texting everyone on WhatsApp or WhatsApping everybody and taking part in the banter kind of, do you know what I mean? Sending the memes and stuff. So he took it that far, he couldn't speak. And so there's a real imperative for men to speak about their mental health. However, telling men to speak doesn't change behavior. Very quickly, maybe over a long period of time, but we can, it's difficult, And so what we're trying to do with Mettle is give people tools that can help improve their mental health without them needing to talk to people. So that is kind of one of the things that are really key to the app. So here are some tools that don't require you to talk about your mental health with anybody, because even though I'm sitting here talking about mental health with you, on a podcast, I still don't want to talk to my mates about how I'm feeling on a Friday night when I'm down the pub.
I think
just don't.
A lot of people will listen to podcasts so they can have these conversations, at least listen to the conversation without having to have that difficult conversation. And you've seen.
So
go on.
So just to go back to that kind of not being able to talk, just to go back to your question about depression. So I've experienced it for myself. I was unable to talk to anybody about it because I was depressed. And so eventually, somehow, I got up the confidence to go to the doctors, as my colleague leading by, and it took all the strength I had to go and see a doctor and tell them, and so all the strength I had, and I went to see a doctor, and I said, look, I think I've got depression, and he said, I'm just going to stop you there. Depression is over the road in occupational therapy. Yeah, so you just need to go over there and make an appointment with them. And of course, so I got up, completely destroyed, and I didn't go over the road and make an appointment. I went to the pub and I got drunk, and I continued ignoring, what needed to be dealt with for the next best part of 10 years, to be honest. So that's kind of I think that's an example of, men don't like talking. Let's try and improve. Let's try and get them better at it, but it will take time. And in the meantime, what else can we do to help them? Give them some practical tools. Yeah, so that's, I guess, what we're trying to do here. But that's, I guess, how that depression fit into my life. And also, I ended up being cured of it through clinical hypnotism, which is one of the things that we have on the app.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
You got a pretty famous hypnotist on the app there.
Yeah, that's right. Paul McKenna,
right.
Who's kind of the world's most famous hypnotist. And again, he kind of, came on board. I said to him, look, Paul, we got this app. There's all this stuff out there, which is generalist, but all the science shows, because we're working with universities and charities, that men need their own specific, gender-specific interventions, to see best outcomes. Men respond best to things that are just for men because they feel safe. So the reason men don't want to talk is because they feel vulnerable. Men, we're trained not to feel vulnerable because we're always strong, the provider, the hunter, whatever you want to call it, that archetype can't be vulnerable. So why would we admit to somebody that our mental health is in a poor place? So it's kind of like, we need. So what we tried to do with Mettle is make it a safe place. So it's just for men. So they feel there's no judgment there. They can't say it's too. So the objections to using a lot of things that are on the market, some of the other apps that are on the market, which might contain similar things, might contain meditation and breathwork and hypnosis and stuff, is that, the three objections that we found on interviewing a couple hundred men were too female, too hippie-ish, and there's nothing wrong with me. So too female makes men feel vulnerable. So it's just for men. Takes that one away. Too hippie-ish makes men feel vulnerable. I don't want to be associated with that stuff. Okay, well, we're completely straight talking and science back. Takes that objection away. Third objection, there's nothing wrong with me. Men don't want to admit that there's anything wrong with them. Well, we're not saying there is. That's why we're about mental fitness, not mental health. And so we kind of reframed it that way. And, I said to Paul, look, we're doing this app. There's nothing out there for men. We want to change the world and give them just great content that can change their state. And Paul has written books on, how to beat anxiety and, how to be more successful. Change Your Life in 7 Days was a book that I read and listened to of his, which did change my life. Took me a little longer than 7 days, but that's okay. But it gave me incredible tools. And so can we tailor them for men? Can we kind of, build them for men? And he's like, absolutely. And he came on board, and that was just, fabulous.
Well, there's a bunch of things I'd like to unpack in what you're saying there. One thing, if I work my way backwards, I was talking with a friend of mine, he's ex-British Army sergeant, and talking generally about the app and you and sort of what you're endeavoring to do. He says, we as men have been conditioned to suppress our emotions, especially in the military. You can't process events and incidents if you are suppressing your emotions and feelings. And, the other thing I'll read out here, because you have developed an app specific for men, and you talk about, 80% male versus female. And I tried doing some research on this and get actual numbers, and they don't keep really good records of suicide and these percentages in a way that's that makes sense. Like, for example, I don't see chronic liver failure from just alcoholism being slotted into the suicide list, or opioid crisis and fentanyl overdoses. But all of these things fit into mental health and the deaths that happen there. So, and the 80% for men versus women, is that because there's more men that are committing suicide, or is that because men typically will choose a more final solution than women? Women typically will use pills, men will use firearms. I mean, statistically speaking.
I mean, what I'd say is I'm not an expert. This is not my area of expertise, so I don't want to kind of, really say definitively, but some of the things we've heard are, men don't, the thing that we discussed, men don't talk. They suppress their emotions. Therefore, they will bottle them up until they can't cope. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one way. Women are much more likely to talk to their friends. So what I can do is give you examples from my own life. So, I go out with my best mate, one of the people I had in mind when building this app, because, he's physically fit, mental health, could do with some improvement, but he needs to feel safe to use it. Now he's using this app. But I go out with him, have a night out, I come back, my wife says, "Oh, how are his family?" I'm like, "Oh, I don't know. I didn't ask."
Right.
They hadn't come up.
We're guys.
Didn't come
That's
up.
not how we interact.
We watched the game. We had a few drinks. We had some banter. It's like, how could it? But you've just been with him. Like it's gonna. She can't compute.
That's right.
It just didn't come up. I didn't ask. I'm sorry. I forgot to ask about his wife and kids. I'm sorry. It's just we were out having a few drinks.
Yeah.
We had a really good night, and that's quite typical. So men and women are different. Yeah, and this science shows that they need different interventions. And one of the big things, and why certainly in the UK a lot of the charities are focused on that message that men need to talk, because there's this thing that will lead them, as I said, I gave that example earlier, that will sometimes lead them to take their own lives because they can't talk. Yeah, they'd rather do that than talk to somebody about their problems. Some people, yeah. So that's number one that we know. And what we're trying to do is offer a bit. We're not trying to deal with people at the end of that end of the scale. It's important to say. We're trying to. This is for everyone. You have to try and be a bit more mentally fit. But it also hopefully, or certainly the evidence shows that if you use the tools in this app, then you're less likely to suffer from depression and anxiety than people who aren't. Yeah. So those are just the knowns. Yeah. And that's not first with controversial science or anything. That's pretty standard knowledge. Yeah.
The best time for you to get physically fit isn't when you're 300-400 pounds. That you're missing the boat on that one. It's right now. Right now, as you start, you get out and
So get mentally fit.
Yeah.
And you're going to perform better in every area of your life. So just going back. Sorry, I know this is slightly referring to something that you said earlier, but it's kind of like men aren't allowed to express their emotions. The one emotion they're allowed to express traditionally is anger.
That's right.
The men are supposed to express everything. That's the acceptable. It's both unacceptable and acceptable. So it's unacceptable as you got angry, or as a man, he's got angry. It's like, but it's societally, it's the only emotion that men are supposed to express is anger, and that's why everything they're not supposed to cry, etc., etc. So I think going to your army friend's point, I think that. So that's one thing. And I think the other thing, as you touched on, is perhaps men are more able. I think that's some of the evidence points towards that.
Final means.
That's right. But, as I say, we're trying not to focus on that side of things, although there's clearly a problem. And, it's sort of a tricky balancing act. As we say, the problem is male mental health, but the solution is mental fitness. Yeah. So if you're mentally fit, if you're physically fit, you're less likely to get diseases, aren't you?
Totally.
You're less likely to suffer. From if you're physically fit, you're less likely to suffer from fatty liver disease, for example, or heart disease, or certain cancers, etc. Do you see what I mean? So it's kind of like, if you're mentally fit, of course, you're less likely to suffer from poor mental health conditions.
Well,
we also have. Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, I'm going to read something here from the Mayo Clinic, and it says, depression is one of the most important risk factors in suicide. Unfortunately, male depression is underdiagnosed because men are less likely to seek help, and because men don't always develop standard symptoms, such as sadness, but instead are more likely to experience fatigue, irritability, sleep disturbances, and a loss of interest in work and hobbies. So I thought I'd read that out just, because most people think about mental health or depression as, okay, I'm sad. Well, according to the Mayo Clinic, men tend to display it in that sort of a way. I'm sure you've seen the Norfolk FC ad for the...
yes.
Right. Powerful ad.
Powerful ad.
And for people who haven't seen that one, I'd say Google it. Basically, in a nutshell, it's these two individuals. watching their favorite football team over and over again, and they're in the bleachers, and there's one guy who's cheering and happy, and his buddy beside him is looking sullen and withdrawn, and each game, same thing over and over again, and then the final game, the guy shows up who's sullen and withdrawn and puts his buddy's jersey beside him because the guy who was happy and cheering was actually the guy who was suffering from the mental health problems.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not always clear.
No, it isn't, and you have to be careful around that. I mean, I was that person.
You were Richard Cory.
I was. Who's Richard Cory? Sorry.
Edwin Arlington Robinson wrote a poem called Richard Cory. Whenever Richard Cory went downtown, we people on the pavement looked at him. He was a gentleman from soul to crown, clean-favored and impurely slim. And he was always quietly arrayed, and he was always human when he talked, but still he fluttered pulses when he said good morning, and he glittered when he walked. And on we worked and waited for the light and cursed the bread. And Richard Cory, one calm summer's night, went home and put a bullet through his head. But the Richard Corys of the world are the ones that you have to kind of look out for. And if you have the tools to be able to identify what these things look like, withdrawn, irritable, lack of sleep, lack of interest in these things, maybe we should be taking that initiative and saying, hey, you should talk to somebody, or do you want to talk? Or, hey, there's this app called Mettle that I've been using that's been got a couple cool tools.
Because even if the tools don't resonate with you and you need more specialist help, we at least have a help page telling you where to go.
And you don't find that in other places.
No, it's not on other apps. So we felt that was really strongly that was something that we wanted to include. But I was the. By the way, I can see why you're an honours student, Travis. That was an excellent recital. Thank you very much.
There you go.
But I was a great masker of depression. So my best mate who I talked about earlier, who was somebody I had in mind for the app, only found out that I had depression when he read about it a couple of months ago in a national newspaper.
Wow.
You know what I mean? It's like, what? I didn't know that.
Yes.
Part of the life when I was, we were going out every day.
These are the people closest to you.
Yeah, it's exactly that advert.
I think in my head, how often do you think about your hot water tank and it flooding in your house? Probably never, right? Most people probably never. I know a fellow, and he goes around, he shows everybody this little alarm you can put underneath your hot water tank, and when moisture hits it, an alarm goes off, and it can notify you. Why is it on his mind? Why is he talking about these things? Because it's affected him personally. And so these are little things that I look out for when talking about people. If things keep coming up, there's a reason for it. And maybe it's not as obvious as someone coming out and saying, hey, I've got an alarm or I've got this. But if there is a common thread to the conversation, maybe there's something that should be dug into a little bit deeper.
Yeah, absolutely.
Have you?
I mean, I can sympathise with him, by the way, because I've had boiler problems that are really expensive to fix.
Have you heard of the Australian Sheds Initiative?
Yes.
This is where I see Mettle moving to. My personal, from an ADHD standpoint and loving to build and create things, I see it moving from a mobile app to a movement, sort of like rucking. Right? Rucking, they got communities and people get together and they put their pack on and they'll go and they'll get their exercise to be able to facilitate a boots on the ground community of people who can, and for people who haven't heard of the Sheds Initiative, in Australia, they found that men were not likely to go and sit down and talk about what's going on in their life with their mates. But you give them a project to work on. They build a shed, and they've got different woodworking, or they have a motor that needs rebuilding on a lawnmower, and they get a group of men working together. They'll talk. They've got a shared focus. They're working on something, and they'll talk about things that maybe they wouldn't normally open up or talk about. And so that's exploded in Australia. I can see a similar thing being driven by Mettle.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, being a movement is something we ultimately want to be. We want to create a community. At the moment, we have to focus on the app.
Of course.
Build the app is expensive. Got to make it
you got to recoup those costs. Come on.
Exactly, and that's a really good first start because it gets us into the pockets and, the lives potentially of millions of men.
Well,
Yeah, but ultimately, Mettle, we want to be synonymous with male mental health, mental fitness. So it's kind of like, okay, well, that means the community, that means at events, that means kind of things happening in the real world to support men and help them be better. Like our mission, our central mission is to help men be better, because we believe if we have better men, then we have a better world. Yeah, men are good at messing things up. Yeah, like every woman has a man in their life and vice versa. Yeah, so a lot of women really are in great support of this. It's kind of like,
I think so.
Only yesterday did I speak to somebody who'd approached me because his wife said, "You've got to download this, get a grip on your anger issues." He'd heard about it on a podcast or whatever, and it's like, now he's on it. And then I spoke to him, he's like, "I love it." But it's kind of
Have you
building that community?
Have you read that study from Harvard, the longest study of its kind, 80 years? It followed different people from all different backgrounds to try and determine what brings happiness into their life. And
well, if it starts with the longest, having ADHD, I'm out.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's where
TLDR, that phrase, TLDR,
yeah,
that is my,
yeah.
Too long, didn't
I use ELIF, ELIF, right? And it's explained like I'm 5. And I type that into AI. I've got an app on my phone called Poe, or I'll use GPT or whatever, right? ELIF, and I give the link, and it'll come through and give, like, I'm a 5-year-old, to give the main points, and then I can dig deeper if I want to.
Great.
But
yeah, that's how I have to work.
They said the number one predictor of happiness across all ages, genders, backgrounds was strong social connections. And
yeah, absolutely.
I would think, I know you're step one just out of the gates with Mettle. Man, if there's a way to get a boots on the ground movement of people getting together and be able to build those social connections, because building a social connection within an app is important, but I think the actual physical connection that people can have is one of the things that people are dearly missing in today's society.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Yeah, and that's obviously we're talking about the flip side of that is that makes people happy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, totally.
Side of that it is the people without social connection. That's one of the biggest risks of somebody taking their own lives is that they're missing that. So that it works all the way across the spectrum, social connection.
And I wonder if it's one of these things where it seems overwhelming, it seems massive, but the reality of it is just these tiny little tweaks, and there really isn't much to it. Like, I think there's a danger to going to talk therapy or going to medication, getting medicated too quickly, because people come in with this approach that there's got to be something wrong with me, and maybe I feel like I'm down, or I feel like I should be ABC, and maybe instead of saying, well, there's got to be something wrong with me, say, how I'm feeling right now is absolutely natural, given my current circumstances, given the fact that I don't have a goal, or I'm not driven, or I'm not exercising, I'm not eating right, I'm not meditating, or I'm not sleeping. Like, how I'm feeling is a very natural byproduct. And rather than looking at it like I have a problem, looking at it like, here's some simple steps or solutions that I can take in order to get there. And I guess the fear is that you go to medication too quick and people get hooked on these things, or they're the wrong ones. And it's really a throwing of the dice when you try and figure out what meds are going to work with somebody. Or you look at talk therapy and you got the wrong person. I mean, it's never going to click for you. But if you can have those strong social connections with your mates, and it's like the old Crocodile Dundee one when he's talking, they're at a party, and he says, that guy's a psychologist or a psychiatrist? What's that? And I forget his friend's name there. She says, well, you go in, you pay him a bunch of money, you talk about your problems, and he helps you out. You keep going there over and over, and you get some results. And she says, well, don't you have anything like that down under? He says, oh, we got the bartender. We tell him our problems. He tells everybody else, no more problem, right? And maybe it's as simple as that for not everything, but...
Yeah, so that's really interesting, because obviously that was delivered as a joke, but it has a huge amount of truth in it. So certainly in the UK, a movement that's starting in the UK is barbers. So it's like men will relax when they're getting their haircut. Yeah, they just talk to their barbers. So a lot of barbers now are being trained in, being able to spot kind of mental health things, but also, how to communicate with men and help them out and point them in the right direction if they need it. Black men especially can often use the barbers as a community
Totally.
hub. A lot of people will be in there, and so we've been working with some guys who are in that community who, are really making great strides because in the black community, mental health outcomes are even worse for black men than white men in the UK. And they find it perhaps harder to talk because of cultural reasons. But the barbers is one of the safe spaces. So, actually that telling the bartender or the barber is becoming now a real place where people can make an impact on male mental health because it's accessible. I feel comfortable there. Yeah, I'm happy to let my guard down for a moment.
Right.
It's a place to go to relax.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to be judged. And if I'm laughed at, it's going to be done in a way because they actually care about me. Right. And it's
exactly. It's my peers.
Right. Yeah.
It doesn't cost me anything either.
Yeah. Yes, totally. That's an important piece of the puzzle.
I'm paying for the haircut anyway.
I love that. That's good. So you just launched it. You got it out of the gates. Initial traction, like testing, I know. I was looking at some of the stats. It was through the roof. The Instagram, Facebook, seeing what the results are back on that. Everyone knows, or was likely aware, that people keep talking about the next pandemic is going to be a pandemic of mental health, right? And it's that we are in a mental health crisis, which maybe that's a good thing. Maybe the pandemic and maybe these things that have pushed people to a point of mental health is good from the path of least resistance principle, or Zipf's law, I think they call it. Have you heard of that one before?
No, not Zipf's law.
So they say, I guess this guy got his name associated with it, but essentially, let's say you got to seek out an answer to a problem you have, and you can look in your building and there's a generalist who has acceptable answers, or you can go to the next building over and you can get the specialist who will give you the bang-on answer. Well, it's easier just to talk to the generalist because I'm going to get the acceptable answer. That's the easy part. If you push it harder, right, if there's enough pain involved, you're going to seek out the actual solution. So maybe it's kind of like, well, I'm in a relationship and it's okay. I'm not happy, but I'm not bad. And you'll just carry this relationship out. But if it becomes violent or really bad, okay, path of least resistance now is to leave this relationship and seek out something new. So maybe the pandemic and the media concentrating on all these negative things is actually pushing people to a point where they're like, mental health is important. We're going to have to move.
I think there's a lot of truth in that. Like if you just take the last pandemic, it made people completely reevaluate their lives, didn't it? And certainly that's for me when I made my big change. I also kind of reevaluated my relationship with my family, as many men especially did, I think. So huge amount of change was forced through a difficult situation. And now my relationships certainly, with my family are a lot closer, I would say, because people were able to think, okay, well, how important is balance, in the world? What is important when a lot's taken away? Our freedom effectively was taken away from us. Our ability to what's important, and what do I want to when I go back, when the world goes back to normal? What bits am I just going to go back to normal, or are things going to be different now? And things have changed. So, it's not the norm that certainly in London that everybody goes to work in the office every day. People might do a day or two from home or more. And that's perfectly normal now. But, it wasn't before the pandemic. It wasn't. Zoom.
Yes.
Yeah. So as a TV producer, if I wanted to pitch a show to LA and I lived in London, I have to fly to LA, pitch it. As soon as COVID happened, obviously that option wasn't available. Yeah, everybody moved to Zoom, and since COVID's over, everybody's stuck on that because it's like, well, why would I fly to LA to pitch a show? Just get on a Zoom. Yeah, it's kind of like, so these things do force change. They're hard, but it's kind of, there's been a lot of positive change that's come through that. For sure.
Well, how are you managing the stress of a startup as well as those boundaries of work time? Because I know doing startups myself, I like to joke. I got my own business. I can take time off whenever I want, which is true. You can. But the reality is you don't. The reality is that it's always on your mind, and you're working when you wake up and working when you go to sleep, and you're talking with your spouse about work. And how do you manage that?
Yeah, so a couple of points there. Somebody told me a while ago, so a coach that I was working with about, you shouldn't really look at work-life balance anymore because that's just going out the window and it's going to go out the window. Think about work-life integration. Yeah. So it's kind of like, okay, well, yeah, I'm talking to my spouse about, Mettle. I'm waking up and thinking about it, but I'm not necessarily in the office the whole time doing that. Do you see what I mean? So I'm making sure that I spend plenty of time at home. We don't work long hours here, but we think about the product all the time. Not true. When we're building the product, we often did have to work very long hours, but and we still do actually, but not always from the office, and I make sure, our CTO, just after we launched the product, he went to Mexico on holiday for 2 weeks, which is a really bad time.
I remember I talked to you then when he was on holidays. Yeah.
It's a really bad time for him to go. Yeah. But he needed to go, and we wanted him to go, because he needed that break. Obviously, the product broke, but not too badly while he was away, and came back and refreshed and ready to go. I'm going away for a week on, to do some surfing and some yoga and some meditation.
Nice.
In a couple of weeks, because I need a break. And I think it's, I say that if we create a mental health app and then our mental health is destroyed by the process of building that app, then we've failed. That's what it comes down to for me.
Yeah. Lead by example.
And also, do the tools work? So, the acid test for me was, okay, now I'm in a really stressful situation, which is, so I've launched a new business and it's stressful. Yeah. Do the tools on Mettle work for me? And the answer is yes, they do. Because I partly built the app because I wanted something decent that works.
I love that. I love that. That's the best.
And so, yesterday, I do the courses, I do the quick hits. Yesterday, I was feeling stressed. Yeah, and we've got like a little chatbot thing. It says, how you feeling? I press stressed. I said, why? Work is full on. So it served me up a couple of breath works from stress and anxiety, and I did them. I felt better. So, built a tool to help me build the tool.
I love it. What do you see in the future? Like, it's hard to look future when you're in the thick of a launch and getting things out there.
Yeah.
But what do you see in the next foreseeable future and the distant future for Mettle?
Yeah, well, so in the very close future, we want to make the app better. We want to. Now we've got a user group. We want to listen to them and feedback and make it more accessible, easier to use, usual things. We're quite UK kind of focused. We're available everywhere, but a lot of our marketing budget has been spent in the UK, so we need to kind of broaden out, and so the whole world knows about us. But ultimately, it's what you said earlier. We want to become a movement. We want to become synonymous with men's fitness. There's so much to take on there. There's no voice there that you can name. There's no brand, not an authentic brand, that stands, that actually do something about men's mental fitness, And it's kind of like, well, that's what we need to step into. So those are our plans. But in the meantime, we've got to, it's all feet on deck. Is that the phrase? I can't remember.
All hands on deck. Yes.
All hands on deck, not feet.
Yeah. Well, we could do both.
Yeah, well, hands and feet, all hands and feet
Yeah.
are on deck, just trying to improve the app.
Mm.
But yeah, certainly the long-term focus has got to be, helping men be better, because we believe that if they're better men, we've got a better world, and that's what we're all doing it for. It's a passion project for everyone. That's another one of our values, passion, because we're all in it because we're completely passionate. None of us are doing it for money. That's for sure. It's quite funny how the people's perceptions of tech, and it's kind of like, it doesn't really work like that.
I mean, some hit.
But yeah,
Everyone compares.
some
I
hit,
mean,
and if you hit, great. Yeah, I'd love it to hit. Of course, I would. Yeah, I'd love to make lots of money off it. Of course, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't. But that is not enough to motivate you to do something like
No.
this. All of us have taken huge pay cuts to do this. And we do it because we're passionate. We really believe there's something there. We really believe there's a gap in the market. We really believe there's a mission. And when we get feedback, not all of the feedback's positive, and that's what we're working on. But most of it is positive. And people are saying, "Oh, I never thought I'd meditate until I tried Chibs, who's our meditation coach.
He's good, eh?
I just love him. He's so cool. And now I'm doing it every day." Or, it's like, we had a guy in Hawaii write to us, and he's kind of like, I've just had open heart surgery. I'm recovering. I found Mettle. I'm using it every day. It's really helping with my mental state, me getting better. We've had lots like that. Somebody in the military writing to us says, "I want to get this out to all my soldiers. It's really helping me." And that's what you do it for, yeah?
A friend of mine just had his leg amputated a couple of days ago, and I'll be visiting him as soon as we wrap up here. But he started a local movement of mental health walks. And he does it every second Sunday, going out and doing a mental health walk after an individual that we know attempted to take his own life, was unsuccessful, ended up losing an eye, and the bullet went under his chin and out through his forehead here, and regrets the second he pulled the trigger. He says he regretted the decision. And I mean, the fellow is a PPCLI, Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry sniper. He says, "I know where the bullet's supposed to go." He says, but at the very last moment, he was intoxicated. It was Christmas time, and very last moment before he pulled the trigger, he heard a booming voice. It says, "Change the angle." And he doesn't know what to attribute that to. He's found faith afterwards and says, "I think that's what it was, but I know where the bullet's supposed to go." Ended up having to affect his own self-rescue. But that affects everybody around you. I mean, people look at this permanent solution to whatever their temporary pain is without realizing, perhaps, or maybe in the moment not caring, that the pain that you have affects your entire family afterwards. Everybody has to carry that. Your friends will end up carrying it. And so this individual, he went out and said, "I'm going to make something positive of this." And he started these mental health walks that they do every Sunday. Of course, now he's going to have a little bit of a recovery time. Maybe I should get him a subscription to Mettle while he's in the hospital here recovering, to help with the meditation.
Well, there's people are using it for that. It's good. And as I say, that's what we're all about. It's about, for me, it was my personal journey. I found these tools. I started meditating at the age of 11 to cope with a neurological illness that I had, which I still have, but just doesn't present, but which made me shake really badly when I was a kid. It's called benign intention tremor. So by the time I was 11, I couldn't get a teaspoon of sugar into a cup of tea. My hands would shake so badly.
It's hereditary, isn't it? That's a hereditary disease, isn't it? Or
it's hereditary. My uncle has it. Yeah.
How's your uncle dealing with it? Is it similar?
So, my uncle is still very visible in him. Yeah. When I was 11, it was very visible in me. He went to seek out kind of anything we can do about it. And, met a doctor who said, well, it's an untreatable disease theoretically, but there's this thing called meditation we've heard of that might help with it. And so he came back and gave me some tapes, and I started meditating every day, and that's how I got into it, and it completely transformed my shaking. I stopped shaking, and I should by rights be shaking all the time.
Isn't that crazy, the power of the brain?
Yeah, it's the power of the brain. Yeah. So transformed. That's how I, got into it to start with. And then the breath work, again, really quick way of transforming your physiological state. And hypnosis, was, I got through having depression and that being my way out of that. So all of these things are things that work for me in my life. And so, I'm just really proud and honoured that I'm able to share them with other people and that they're having a positive effect. We're not going to get everything right in the first, but people are responding well.
Is there anything else that we should be talking about that we haven't talked about?
Maybe why in Canada ice hockey fights are allowed to go on for as long as they are.
That's a good question.
Nothing to do with what we've been talking about. I always wondered that. Because they just don't stop them. They don't seem to stop them. Or did they stop them at some point?
Yeah, no.
I think my son was watching some on YouTube the other day. It's
I think the rules are if they hit the ground, okay, it's stopped. But until then, you go.
I've got it right. Until they hit the ground. Yeah.
Well, here's an unpopular opinion, I'm sure. Like you mentioned earlier about men, they can only, generally speaking, the emotion that they're encouraged to share is anger.
That's right.
And there's some people who would say that mixed martial arts and jiu-jitsu is just a legitimizing male touching, where women, it's okay for them to hug and interact and they'll do their hair. This is a way that men can interact because, and I know I'll catch a lot of heat from some people who are right into it, but they say, hey, the big a draw for some people, aside from the fact that, it's good physical conditioning, mental conditioning, you get some skills you can take away to be a protector, but you're forming social bonds with other men in a way that would not be socially acceptable outside of that.
Yeah, I think that, so I know a few people who do MMA. I think they probably agree that brotherhood, if you like, is very strong. There's a lot of respect in that community. You don't get, you tend not to get people with big egos. It's kind of like, okay, top performers maybe, but in general, the guys who are doing it, there's a community there. They feel really passionate about it. I know somebody who's an ex-alcoholic who just went afterwards, kind of just went to AA meetings and MMA classes. That's where he got his community from. That's where he kind of, do you know what I mean? That's where he got his strength from. Both of those are communities,
Very much so.
Yeah. So there's, I think maybe there's something in that.
Well, I'm going to put some links up to the app and make sure people have information to the things that were talked about in here. Neil, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the Silvercore Podcast. I really enjoyed getting to know you better.
I have too, Travis. Myself and you, I should say.
I love it.
No, it's been a delight. You've been a great host. So I'm going to retreat into my evening and you're going to get on with your morning.
That's exactly it.
Loved it. Thank you so much.